One of the primary reasons why our observations are so unreliable is that every observation that we make is finite, which is to say it's limited. Our eyes, our observations, cannot account for all variables. Therefore, any scientist worth his or her sodium chloride knows that no matter how many finite, limited, subjective experiences that they may pile up, we'll call these little t truths, they'll never amount to an infinite, non-limited, objective capital T truth. So, going from little t truths, specific instances, to capital T truths, that is to say generalizations, is inductive reasoning. It's also known as bottom-up logic, which can never provide objective truth. Inductive reasoning is the attempt to derive a general law, general principle, from specific instances. Put simply, induction is going from specifics to generalizations. It's bottom-up. It's little t going to a capital T. Now, all of the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, etc., are inductive. The scientist collects evidence by applying the scientific method. The scientist takes specific instances, specific results, and tries to guess from those the general principles or the general rules. It is impossible to justify inductive reasoning because one can never be sure what is true in a specific case or instance will always be true in general. This is because inductive reasoning allows for the possibility that the conclusion, the general principle, is false, even if all the specific instances or the premises are true. If a scientist is studying crows, he might observe 999 crows and that they are all black. But is he ever able to assert that all crows are black? No. The next crow he observes might be an albino. One can never observe all crows, past, present, and future. Instead of being valid or invalid, inductive arguments are either strong or weak, which describes how probable it is, not certain, that the conclusion is true. If a hypothesis withstands repeated trials by many independent researchers, then confidence grows in the hypothesis, but that doesn't mean that the hypothesis has been proved. All accepted hypotheses are therefore tentative, meaning that they're uncertain and they're always subject to change, and any hypothesis can be overturned tomorrow. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's character of Sherlock Holmes is perhaps the most iconic detective in literature. His character continues to enthrall us. In fact, in 2009 and again in 2011, Robert Downey Jr. played Sherlock Holmes on the big screen. And more recently, there's been a BBC series with a modern-day Sherlock Holmes. One of the things that makes Sherlock Holmes so captivating is his seemingly supernatural ability to deduce specific facts about people and situations based upon his careful observation and deductive reasoning. In fact, in the new BBC series, where Sherlock Holmes is a detective in today's modern-day London, Holmes actually has a website that is titled The Science of Deduction. However, we just saw that all of science employs inductive reasoning, not deductive reasoning. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was himself a physician, a man of science. So it should come to no surprise that the character of Sherlock Holmes uses inductive reasoning, not deductive reasoning, to draw his conclusions. For example, suppose Sherlock Holmes comes to your house, and seeing that you're wearing your wristwatch on the right wrist, he induces, not deduces, that you're left-handed. He went from a specific instance to a general principle. Note that his conclusion is not necessarily true. Perhaps you just like wearing your watch on the right wrist. Now suppose Sherlock Holmes also notices that you have a notebook that is specifically made for left-handers on your coffee table. And next to it on the coffee table is a coffee mug with the handle turned out to the left. And the coffee mug reads, "Everyone's born right-handed, only the gifted overcome." Perhaps you're even wearing a shirt that says, "Kiss me, I'm left-handed." Now, this would be a much stronger argument, but it's still not a deduction. And still his generalization is not necessarily true. Maybe you just have a really obnoxious left-handed roommate, and you didn't have any clean laundry and you wore a shirt, and you used his coffee mug, etc. Maybe you recently visited a specialty store for left-handers where everything was on sale and you just can't resist a good bargain. Or maybe you just desperately want to be left-handed because you know that only left-handed people are in their right minds. I'm left-handed, by the way. Some logicians have referred to what Sherlock Holmes does as Holmesian deduction, and they do that to distinguish it from deduction itself. What Holmes is largely doing is well-informed inference or inductive reasoning. Holmes goes from the specifics to the general, which is what all scientific investigation involves. For these examples, we see that science can never give us capital T truth, infinite truth, objective truth, because infinite, universal, objective truth can never be validly obtained by finite, limited, or subjective observations. Now, Sherlock Holmes seems to have a supernatural ability, but that's because the author, whether it's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or someone writing for the movies or a television show about Sherlock Holmes, the writer is always omniscient. The writer knows everything. The writer knows the end from the beginning. And so he can write into his story that anytime Sherlock Holmes makes an inference, it's always correct. However, in the real world, Sherlock Holmes does not exist, and science is often wrong and never produces certain truth. In contrast to logical induction or inductive reasoning from scientific methodology, Christian methodology is logical deduction from the Holy Scriptures. Deductive reasoning is also known as top-down logic instead of bottom-up. And it's the process of reasoning from one or more general statements or principles to reach a logically certain conclusion. Deductive reasoning links premises with conclusions. And if all premises are true, the terms are clear, and the rules of deductive logic are followed, then the conclusion that is reached is necessarily true. The classic example is this. Here's our first premise. All men are mortal. Our second premise is Socrates is a man. From these two premises, it can therefore be concluded through deductive reasoning that Socrates is mortal because he's a man, and all men are mortal. Let's look at a different example now. Our first premise is this: God is infinite truth. Our second premise is God has revealed himself through the Bible. From these two premises, we can therefore deduce the conclusion that the Bible reveals infinite truth. If God is infinite truth, and if God has revealed himself through the Bible, then the Bible reveals infinite truth. Infinite objective truth must come from an infinite objective source. The Christian's primary source for truth is infinite, whereas the scientist's primary source for truth is finite. Let's see why that is. When scientists are asked by what authority they can make certain claims about the universe, they appeal to primary sources in the scientific literature. In the medical community, we talk about evidence-based practice. And what this means is, if we're going to make a change in a medication or a therapy, we want to know what's the most up-to-date research on this new therapy or this new drug. So we go to the scientific literature, which is our primary source. And from that, we make arguments that it's better to use this drug over another. But again, tomorrow we might find, as we continue to make observations and we continue to experiment, that perhaps we didn't see all of the different side effects of this new drug. And perhaps another drug will be observed that is better with less side effects. And so the scientific literature is always changing. As Christians seeking objective truth, we appeal to a completely different primary source. Our primary source is of an infinite origin. It's God himself. We look to the Word of God, which tells us, for example, in Malachi 3:6, "For I am the Lord, and I do not change." Or Hebrews 13:8, "Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever." Psalm 105, "For the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting," and make note of this, "his truth endures to all generations." That means that his truth is always true in every single time for every single person.